Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. In today's episode, we speak with Jeffrey Abramson, who discusses how films opened his mind to different cultures around the world and how he hopes to share that with his daughter. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and our guest today is the incredible Jeffrey Abramson. He founded the Gen Art Film Festival and has worked across media, film, brands, technology. He advocates for artists in the most amazing way. And most recently, he was in marketing at Meta. And I'm just so grateful that you're here with us today, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I was very excited to get the invitation for this topic that you're covering because it's definitely front of mind for me.
Oh, great. I'm going to kick us off with the question, what is your first movie memory?
I mean, that one's super easy because it's family legend at this point. My parents took me at the age of 3 to see Star Wars. And within the first minute or so, when the stormtroopers come blasting through the doors, I started screaming, "Don't get me, don't get me," and was dragged out of the theater. My recollection is that in my mind, the doors that they were blasting through is the same door that I saw coming into the theater that was outside of the theater, which ultimately is the projection booth. So perhaps I was correlating my location as being the same space that the stormtroopers were busting through.
Oh, and did they show it to you when you were a little bit older?
I mean, by the time I saw it again, it was totally in my hands. By that point, I think it was on VHS tape and VCR. So some friend had it and we watched it, and they were already Star Wars junkies at that point, and maybe I was a little late to the game.
And do you so that seems like a memory. Do you remember that, or do you remember the story of it?
How do we know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a big question I often have. I think I have a distinct memory in my mind, and then I go back and watch an old VHS tape or see an old photo or even 16 millimeter film from my grandfather. I'm like, wait, no, that's the way I see it in my mind. I guess I'm remembering the media, not the memory. So stories implant themselves probably very close in the brain. I don't know the actual science of this, but I imagine they implant themselves very closely to our actual memories. So I see the theater, the layout of the theater. I can see the screen, and I can recall seeing the projectionist door. And that's about all I really think I really remember of it.
Now that you're a parent, do you ask your parents what they were thinking?
So I did ask them this actually preparing for this podcast. And they're, of course, like, I don't know, we didn't know things. We just brought you wherever. And I appreciate that. I think it's really formative for me as somebody that's in the storytelling business. I appreciate that there was no censorship. But I mean, my dad had older sisters. They're 8 years older than me, so they're 11 or something. So they're probably bringing them to the movie, and they all wanted to go, so they brought me along. I remember seeing a lot of adult movies. I don't want to say they're inappropriate necessarily, but I mean, I saw a lot, sometimes maybe inappropriate. I was probably about 8 years old when I believe I saw Sophie's Choice. Could be that I had seen a different movie and my parents were in that theater. They might have left me in another room and I maybe got out and then I went into the back of their theater. I think I don't remember exactly how it happened, but
I do remember when we were younger, I had an older brother and we would go to movies that were at the same time, and they would see the adult movie and we would see the kid movie, and then we would meet up afterwards. So I do remember that scenario of things happening back in the day when we spent a lot of time in movie theaters. I don't see that for families in the same way. I would never do that now because I wouldn't feel safe.
Yeah, would I feel safe at that age, 8 years old? I don't know. I don't live in the suburbs right now, but maybe if I did, depending how familiar I was with the theater, et cetera. I used to ride my bike to the movie theater to see movies, probably as young as 8.
I must have been 11 and 12 when I lived in Florida at the time, and they would drop me off at the theater, and they'd have arcades and my friends, and then we'd go to the mall afterwards across the street. And Yeah, and in New York in high school, I mean, we'd go by ourselves all the time to the movie theaters.
And movies that were out at the time, I mean, I don't always remember what I saw in theater and what I saw on VHS, but movies like The Neverending Story or Explorers or Flight of the Navigator, I definitely saw in a theater. The Dark Crystal, I definitely saw in a theater. I know because I can remember. I think there were birthday parties that I attended, or it might have been my own. I don't know. Some of those I probably saw on my own. Some maybe my parents dropped or brought me. But it's kind of these like moments that, and every once in a while, I have a fleeting memory of these like more adult movies. So I talked to my dad also about the fact that I remember seeing The Accidental Tourist. And he's like, that would have been me. So he's like, I don't remember bringing you. And we looked up the year it was. It's like, oh, I would have been 10. And we're like, yeah, you probably did come. And it was an adult drama. And I think that I found it world opening to like be exposed to content that was different people having experiences in the world that were different than mine.
Something that you just mentioned that I want to go back to, because I think we have something in common that we explore storytelling across medium, is that you don't always remember if it was on film or on VHS or DVD. When you lose yourself in a film, it doesn't really, I mean, being in the cinema can help you lose yourself in a film, but it can happen anywhere.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately too, in terms of audio storytelling. So the first movies, in essence, that I've exposed my daughter to, and she's now a year and a half, but like within the first weeks, was playing soundtracks for the Muppet movie or the Annie movie. I have to actually bring some of those back. And I remember as a kid having like Benji the dog movie on vinyl and the Muppet movie on vinyl. And even later in life, when I started tinkering with making my own stuff, I would transfer some of my favorite movies to cassette tape from VHS to cassette so I could listen to them on airplanes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Sound is such a pivotal piece of storytelling. It's what I think allows you to suspend disbelief, especially in immersive media, because the visuals just aren't there yet. And when you think about Spielberg and John Williams soundtracks, we don't really get orchestration that much like that today. And I played Peter and the Rabbit a lot for Miles, and I just started listening to the Lion King soundtrack with him. One of the things I'm reading in a toddler book is how important imaginative play is and storytelling with characters for them to start identifying ideas and behaviors.
Absolutely. I think when you listen to a story, you have to visualize in your mind the full experience. So you're playing a much more active role as an audience member.
The first place I know your work was with Gen Art Film Festival. And so you picked the art of moving image.
Yeah, I found that motion pictures were the most compelling form of art out there. So like if we think of art as and storytelling, in particular those two things together, as this basic human need to help us understand how we exist in this world. It's been evolved over time from everything from cave paintings to songs and dance to the printing press to radio, etc., movies, and now immersive media, which you, I know, like me, recognize as being perhaps the most advanced technology that we've created to be able to step into somebody else's shoes and experience what they're experiencing in life, the emotion of it. When I think about movies, I was actually thinking, preparing for this, that I'm horrible at remembering plots, dialogue, character names. I remember feelings from movies. That's what I remember. I get mocked a lot by my friends because I never know when a line is from a movie, or I can't remember what happened in certain movies. I also never really liked to watch a movie more than once. I was not one of those cinephiles that had to watch movies over and over. I loved having new experiences every time. And probably all of that led to my interest in making movies, but then eventually curating and marketing content, this kind of content in movies. So I think that's what ultimately led me to fall in love with film festivals, was just this idea of discovery and being able to constantly have these new experiences through cinema, and then to be able to curate and provide unique experiences to audiences from different points of view, let alone the programming aspect, exposing me to the fears, hopes, and dreams of visual artists, storytellers in that current moment of that year. Like what are they experiencing, and how does this medium help us? It's like a form of therapy that we don't even recognize that is helping us cope with what's going on in the world over those certain durations of time.
It takes years to make a movie. Sometimes it can take 10 years, 15 years. Every once in a while, someone can make one really fast. But it's really interesting that the ones that get made all feel they're of a time. And so it may not be that your movie is bad or not right. So I wonder if that collective conscious has anything to do with what gets made when.
Totally. That's interesting. And what breaks that mold really uniquely. There was a very distinct moment in time where I remember programming a slate where I thought, oh, wow, okay, this year there's a shift in what medium storytellers are choosing to use to decide whether they should make a narrative film or a documentary about a particular subject. I think it was around the time of An Inconvenient Truth, and documentaries starting to get a lot more attention, social media starting to pop out. And I think people are starting to recognize, okay, if I want the real story, I want documentary. And then if you wanted to tell more of a broader parable, some sort of moment story, then maybe narrative is the right way to go, because it was the year that Risk Cutter's A Love Story played Sundance, and then we debuted it at Gen Art as well. It would have been 2006. It was a film that was ethereal. It existed in a different universe, but it had real emotions and real anxieties. And I thought that people could relate to that more.
Yeah. Craft of cinema has been made accessible to a lot of creators. And I'm curious, when we were young and we were going to movies, we really could suspend disbelief.
Mm.
And I'm curious if our kids and even some younger generations who understand that kind of movies are craft and they're not real. And, like going back to your original story of screaming, like we didn't know that. I didn't even realize I could work in movies until I was in college.
Oh, really? Knew by like sixth grade. That was it. That was it. I got my VHS camera for my bar mitzvah the next year. And then I was like, I'm going to do this. And actually, funny side note, but relevant to all this, because I was such a Spielberg kid, essentially. I had no introduction to more avant-garde cinema till later. I had an amazing high school professor, Pete Peterson, who brought a lot of that into my purview. And I had a chemistry teacher who told me one day in 11th grade, I know you want to work in movies. Well, my former student, Joel Cohen, is showing his new movie, Barton Fink, at the Walker Art Center. You should go check it out. And so I saw Barton Fink and I was like, wait, what? What? Another like crazy movie I'd seen when I was younger was Brazil, Terry Gilliam. There was this taste of this like, okay, I don't even know if I should be seeing this movie. There are some things going on here that are beyond my understanding of how the world exists,
Yeah.
And so when I saw Barton Fink, I think I was old enough now to suddenly be like, okay, wait, I totally understand there's this other universe of like cinema that exists that could be really compelling to me. So I think that like process of discovery for a kid, from what I can see from watching my own kid, is very similar still. How things get made, or even this notion that they can do stuff themselves, whether it's feature-length movies or TikTok, is like next. I mean, the effort I had to put in to make VHS stuff, I had like an Apple IIc computer that could control 2 VHS decks to edit things. Like that was groundbreaking at the time. I don't know how that's going to impact. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded, but I don't know how that's going to impact like the suspension of disbelief. Maybe we just need to stop making superhero movies and start making things they've never seen before.
Yeah, I'm curious, like 8 years old, what made you know you wanted to pick up a camera?
First thing that's coming to my mind is going through boxes in my parents' basement that were the archives of our family history. I just loved looking at photos and letters and all this media and trying to piece together the story of my own family. I think just my love of the actual human story, the personal human story, and in particular history, and how that informs who we become as people. Like, I think it might have like started there. Also, my mom was a big techie, and she always had new technologies, and she had very early VHS cameras, so I just would tinker with them because they were around.
We had cameras, and Maybe because I thought I was going to be a ballet dancer and that was where
Prob-
my focus was. I loved movies. I loved them. I would make my mom pretend I wasn't allowed to do some things like I didn't want to do in New York with my friends to not be uncool and then go to the movies with her instead. And I preferred that than going and smoking pot at some Nine Inch Nails concert or something. We lived across the street from Lincoln Square cinemas. So we would just see beautiful films from around the world. And I loved it. She did take me when I was like in ninth grade to see Pulp Fiction. And I remember being like, Mom, what's OD stand for?
Right, but I think that's totally legit. Like, how would you learn that otherwise, right?
Yeah.
When? Good thing
I'm
you learned it then, maybe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially at that age when I hung out with all the kids that were in kids.
You had posed an interesting question in preparation for this about did I ever see a film that I wasn't supposed to see?
Yeah.
I have a very distinct, well, first of all, I had access to cable television and a VHS rental house near me that I went there just to look at titles. Like I didn't always leave with a tape. I sometimes just loved to go explore the aisles and see what was out there. It was before Blockbuster would have 20 or 30 or 100 versions of any title. It was like one or two of everything. I would just randomly grab stuff based off of a title or cover art or whatever was on one of those television networks. So I have no idea like all the things that I saw, but there were sometimes things were viral. Like you would hear about, okay, like, oh my God, my friends saw The Toxic Avenger. You have to see The Toxic Avenger. And I forget what the rating situation was when The Toxic Avenger came out, but we grabbed it. I don't even know how old I was, but I remember 10 minutes into the movie, some kid's head gets smashed by a car rolling over his head. And all of a sudden, I hear some reaction from the back of the room. And I don't even know if it was my mom or my dad, but they're like, that's enough. You're not watching this movie. And of course, then I went to a friend's house and finished it some other time. But I think that for the most part, that's the only time I ever could remember being told I couldn't watch something. And I think that I'm really appreciative that I didn't have that level of censorship that exists right now. And I know that you've talked about common sense media and we have the rating system, and it's good to have these guides. But I do think as a parent, I'm not seeking to be overprotective. I think I really want to expose her to whatever attracts her attention, honestly, and then be able to explain sort of emotions or things that they might experience. You know, we were just visiting her grandparents, and her aunt had a movie on this Mexican drama, a new recent Mexican drama called Dive. And obviously, she can't read the subtitles, but I could see her reacting to the character's emotions. Like she seemed very concerned, the character, because the character was crying. And I explained, and I just was like, oh, first of all, this is a story, and she's upset about something, and it's great that you're experiencing what she's experiencing. So I want to provide that kind of like self-discovery process and then be there for her.
Yeah. A lot of times I would watch movies. We would rent for the weekend and watch what we wanted to watch. And I'm not sure they even knew the content or even knew to be concerned about the content that we were watching.
Right. Absolutely. So at least now, like, it's a lot easier, right? Like you'd be like, oh, what movie you're watching? You can look it up. Back then, you probably would have had to just sit there and watch it with them to catch the one moment, the one thing that could give them nightmares for a year or
Yeah.
whatever. So at least we have a lot more resources at our disposal now. So it makes me feel like it's even safer to let that exploration happen.
What I found really interesting about Common Sense Media, which I am in the show notes going to link out to their recommendations, is because they review the films and tell you what's in it. So
Yeah.
you can make the decision on the content itself of, oh, this is pretty violent. I think it depends on our kids' personalities and what they can handle.
I was thinking about this too, the content of the movies and the content that we saw growing up. I just caught like a Flintstones clip the other day and I was like, holy misogyny. Like these things that we at the time wouldn't have necessarily been a concern even for the adults, but now we would think twice about. I think that it's good to have these resources. I actually hadn't really given it as much thought until coming onto this show because we definitely want to limit screen time, but not story time. And I also want to slowly introduce the idea of movies or motion pictures to her. So we've started by showing her animal videos. So we're just running YouTube playlists of animal videos right now. But we were just at her grandparents' house, my parents, and the news is on 24/7. And every once in a while, I catch her watching the news, and I'd be like, okay, well, she's good. Like, let her be exposed to that right now. It's fine. It's not all the time. But I'm being somewhat mindful about how it's happening, but I'm also being practical that she's going to get exposed to things.
Yeah. And the only time I let him watch the screen is, I don't know if you know the YouTube woman, Ms. Rachel.
Yeah. Yes. We actually did play some Miss Rachel for her recently.
But like, if I'm getting ready in the morning, I just need the 20 minutes of me time. And it really helps. I did once put on episode 1. And Miles doesn't like the screen for more than 10 minutes or so at a time. He'll look at me, even with Miss Rachel, and be like, all done, and be ready to be taken out. So,
well, that's something to be said about how do we train this generation to be okay with long form media, even like books, but movies in particular, like to sit still and see a whole movie. And I think being trained in seeing things in theaters where there's nothing else to do was probably really, really helpful. And once you have I want to believe that when you have the experience a few times, that you recognize it as it being its own unique experience that can't be replicated by anything else. Maybe binge watching 10 episodes of some new TV show, but in particular in the theater experience too. It's weird in my house here now, like we tend to watch TV shows. We have a long list of movies that we want to watch for ourselves, but it just generally isn't the thing that we do. And I think movies still tend to, for me, be much more emotionally compelling because they're so compact and you have to get so much more into it. And I think like I have to be emotionally and mentally prepared to experience movies sometimes and to come out of movies. Let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's important for kids in any media too, is that there's like an entry, re-entry. The re-entry is important, and end credits with music like serve a really important part of that reentry process to deal with what you just experienced and then come back out into the world. And I would used to get so mad when friends would get up in the theater and just like be chatting and disrupt that part of the process for me. And I think that's something to be aware of with kids. Like they can be really powerful, and we need to like honor that as they re-enter into the world.
Yeah, I loved the conversations after going to see a movie. You know, I liked if it was a funny movie, we had inside jokes together. If it were, you know,
Right.
like just processing what I've experienced, or even journaling about the feelings that I had from those, which was more high school.
Totally. I also journaled quite a bit, and it paralleled me getting a VHS camera. Like as soon as I got the camera, I was also journaling a lot. I didn't love The Fabelmans as a movie, but I did really relate to the scene in the movie when he essentially like is looking through the edit and discovers that his mother's having an affair with his father's best friend. And I think everybody is observant in this world, but when you learn to be self-aware about being very observational in the world and start trying to capture those things, it's like another level of emotional engagement with the experience of living. And just this idea, I think it was also, I'm glad that I journaled, because I didn't know at the time that's good for like taking the weight out. But I was observing a lot of things in the world and the way people engage, the stories unfolding around me, like the movie, in just daily life. And so whether we're journaling for ourselves or watching movies to help us process those things that we experience in the world, I think it's really important.
Yeah. All right. So there's so many different ways we can introduce films to our children. I'm curious if you're going to show LaRue movies in a cinema or at home first.
I absolutely thought it was going to be cinema before she arrived. But of course, then she arrived during COVID too. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do it at some point when I'm on parental leave, when she's older. I got headphones even, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think I still want to do that, but I hadn't distinctly thought if that would be a home experience or a theater experience yet. I think I'd be more compelled to bring her to a theater now than I would be to turn on a movie in the living room. I don't think I'm ready to turn on a movie in the living room for her, but I am ready to take her to a theater, if that makes sense.
Maybe you and I are on the same time, like in 3 years. We'll like get New Beverly Cinema to play E.T.
Oh my God.
Right? Or something
Yeah.
like that. Because that's like the type of movie I want to take Miles to see. And then in prepping for it, playing the soundtrack and introducing him to the character and all of that stuff. I mean, it would be my best if every Friday night or Saturday night he and I went to the movies together or
Oh my
Sunday
God.
afternoon or something as like an
Well,
activity
these
that we
parental
did.
matinees that exist, like I think that was one of the things during COVID. They like scrapped I don't think they did the like morning mommy and me, daddy and me screenings and stuff that you could do with kids. I haven't actually really looked into that in a while. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly also as a former festival director, I have actually thought about like just renting a theater and getting these movies and inviting friends to do something like that.
Oh,
And I don't know what the right age is yet for what movies. Like when you bring up ET, I mean, obviously, like for me, ET was everything when that movie came out. It was my everything. To this date, like when family members see some sort of vintage ET thing, it pops up in the mail for me. Like I, in fact, have my own documentary that I want to make called Finding ET because I had my Pete Peterson, that professor that taught me about world literature and world cinema, he had a life-size ET, what I found out later was laundry hamper, but he had rigged it with an electrical light. He retired when I graduated and he gave it to me. And I eventually brought it to college and then it ended up in some friends like storage and then it went missing. And I want to know where it is. And I want to like, why do I want to know? Why do I
mm-hmm.
care so much about this? I recently discovered Elliot's house here in Los Angeles where it is and had a weird moment showing up there. Why? Why is that so like, why do I feel emotional talking about that right now? I
Yeah.
don't know. I've thought about, there's so many random movies that have come to mind, but like animated or hybrid animated movies like Pete's Dragon was like a big movie to me as a kid. An American Tail, The Black Cauldron. One of the first sort of like kid themed but live action movies that I can remember seeing was The Black Stallion, which had Mickey Rooney played like this older. There was like a young kid and Mickey Rooney, and it was just like the relationship between an older man and a young kid and this horse. I don't know. It just the whole thing like blew my mind. I haven't seen that I don't know when I last saw that movie.
Yeah.
Making a list of all these movies and then being able to like create a curated list for my daughter. Like I love that you've inspired me to do this.
I'm so excited. And I would love for you to share that list with me whenever you have it. I'm compiling my own. I have the films that I know probably I'll show him as a teenager if he loves the art of cinema, like In the Mood for Love and I Can't Not Do Wong Kar-wai. And there's, I loved Clueless. It was like such of a time.
We just watched it this weekend. It was on like TBS or something.
I love that movie still. It still sticks with me. And then I remember there was a whole bunch of teen movies when I was in high school, like She's All That.
I knew you were going to say that.
And
I was working on Miramax at that time when those movies came out.
I just remember going with my girlfriends to see them. And I remember going to see Jawbreaker. And
Jawbreaker was great. I saw that at Sundance. Yeah.
And I was,
great movie.
16 or 17, and at the time I was friendly with Jenna Malone, but she was 14 or 15 and was like technically not allowed to get into that because of the age. But
interesting.
The woman in the theater recognized her and brought us in the side entrance.
That is fantastic. See, you had that New York City experience. Like I didn't have an art house movie theater growing up. Like I got to see Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was a cool, unique cinema experience. But we eventually got a Landmark when I was in high school. And I'm sure there were there was the Minneapolis Film Society would show things. I got it, but I didn't discover a lot of that till I was later. And when I think about the movies that I want my daughter to see when she's in high school, I don't nearly have the same kind of like the art experience, or even just like it's John Hughes movies, probably just because I think that those interpersonal relationships are evergreen. In a world before the technology that we have today I just really want to expose her to that. Because I think we have really short-term memories for the way the world existed decade to decade and what the feelings were around that. I think it's really important. I go back to my love for cinema coming from my love for history, but I really want to know what it felt like to live in different eras over time. Cinema is the closest I can experience that, or in books as well. But
yeah, one that keeps coming up is Singing in the Rain.
Musicals for sure.
I definitely had very quote unquote, if we're going to gender taste, girly, like Cinderella. I would put on rags and pretend I was cleaning because I was Cinderella. I just loved Clueless, Bring It On, 16 Candles. All of those movies were what I really related to. But I also loved art film and sports movies and kind of hipster, like Empire Records was a big one for me.
Yeah, I think there was I had that same sort of like dual taste, if you will. I was very mainstream for the movies I liked, although sci-fi and fantasy, like I was thinking, for example, that, I don't even remember if I even saw Labyrinth, but I think it's something that my daughter should see one day. Even 2001, I didn't really love personally, but I think it's an important movie. So like sci-fi and fantasy weren't really my genres, but then Terry Gilliam and the Coen brothers were. But I didn't realize that till later. And I still don't love sci-fi and fantasy because I feel like anything can happen that the writer, like you just can't anticipate anything at all. So it feels sometimes like a roller coaster without any guardrails. And I don't know if I'm scared of that or I don't know what it is, but I want her to be exposed to that. I just personally, I have to like dig a little bit deeper to find the right things.
I like grounded sci-fi where it's less fantastical worlds, but thinking about how technology is going to affect humanity. And that's the arena where I find myself creating and writing because of working in the way I've been working like 10 years in front of humanity, of imagining both good ways and bad ways that could play out.
That's valid.
Like, I'm a big Spike Jonze fan.
Yeah, Spike Jonze, totally. I do like people who operate in these alternative worlds. There was a film at Sundance this year called The Pod Generation. 100% holds up. It's tapping into like real technologies that we have access to today that just aren't fully realized to the extent that, as they are in the movie. But I do think that movies as both context, I said, of how people exist in the world and also for driving your imagination and making you think about the possibilities and really driving innovation in society is like core important, right? We need our fantasy, sci-fi storytellers and artists to help drive our actual future forward. It's a really important part of the evolution of our species and society. Like we have to have vision for the way things could be. I think a lot of that is we recognize our own ability to be creative ideators through our experiences in movies and other art forms.
I never really had a fear of a new medium making an old medium extinct. But based on how I see people consuming media in general, I'm nervous for cinema.
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball on that one either. It's weird. The theatrical experience for sure. But I think that there's ways that we can solve for that. My favorite memories going to the theater as a kid was birthdays. Just making them more eventized moments can really help because that's why we first and foremost fell in love with movies were those communal experiences, watching these stories with other people, feeling the collective emotion in the room, which is a real, like scientifically proven thing that happens. I mean, I feel you. A weird side note, but I've been trying to promote the idea of like, and this might seem antithetical, but treating TikTok or short form content creators with the same level of artistic integrity that we do cinema auteurs if they are very good at what they do with their craft, because these are the future storytellers in many ways. So let's encourage them to make important things that really will have good impact on society, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different form for sure. We want them to be responsible storytellers, but also even when the shift from film to digital, I think changed the intention of a creator and of a moment. Like you didn't have unlimited takes. Do you think David Fincher could really make what he makes?
David Fincher probably can't, but will some new kid coming up be able to make something of that level of craft and impact? I don't know. I remember thinking, because I went to film school at the exact moment when everything transitioned, and I had to battle my way into an Avid class because I hadn't taken intro to editing. Or no, maybe I took intro to editing. I had to like take two, and I'm like, you're really going to make me learn how to type on a typewriter before I type on a computer? My ability to think more innovatively about what I'm doing is going to be enhanced by having these various options.
So, like, knowing the constraint and the finality of, if you think that this could be your only take, that you only have room for one more, that makes magic.
You're right. I totally buy that. Yeah. So going back to worrying about cinema, I tend to have resolved myself to the fact that everything evolves, but I do love and think there's a special case for this. So I think it's important that we maintain it. I do think we also lose something for not having mass media that everybody tends to experience in society, to be able to have collective thinking, reasoning, emotions together. But I don't know. I've kind of resolved myself to its evolution more than trying to figure out how do I save it.
Yeah, part of me feels like maybe a combustion of this tentpoleness would allow it to reemerge as an art form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and scarcity, and only put it in theaters again for a while. But the business has to be okay. Like maybe when cinema becomes like not the primary driver of revenue, then that can happen.
When we stop needing to pay so much above the line, that we're all in it as players together to make something that's a piece of art that isn't so expensive, so we can actually make our money back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happening is like they need more money to do more releases at a bigger budget, and they're having more and more struggle getting people to see them, and it's like killing itself.
Totally. And we've talked about this before too, but when blockchain technologies help to divvy up the waterfall of revenue that comes from a movie in real time to all the different people, from actors all the way down to PAs, the way that like Matt and Ben want to do with their new company, I think that then more artists will take the risks.
But I think part of the idea behind Raising Cinephiles is about passing along the love of cinema to the next generation. And how can we do that if cinema doesn't exist?
Yeah, okay, so yes, I get it. How about theaters then? How do we save the theaters?
I was devastated when ArcLight closed.
Yeah, absolutely. That the ArcLight, the Landmark theaters closing.
And shame on the makers for not insisting, finding a way to fundraise to keep these places alive that were so iconic for our community and watching cinema.
I know, but some are stepping in, like Tarantino. And then we have the Eagle Theater, the Vidiot's Theater is going to be opening on the east side.
I saw a job posting for their theater manager, and I was like, I wish Miles and LaRue were 16 and could work there in the evenings and on weekends. I would kill for that, you know?
Yeah, totally. I know that Ryan Johnson's a big backer of Vidiot. Some weird extent, the artists are, so if they're overcompensated, maybe then they like give back in this other way. I've been thinking about that in general for artists to support. Don't necessarily support the Los Angeles theater. Where did you grow up? Make sure that town has a movie theater. I think that's super important, that people remember where they came from, and especially if they left because they felt like there wasn't something there for them. How can you bring that thing to that community so other kids don't either feel like they have to leave or will never have access? Maybe it's that communal experience. Maybe it's the ability to talk to friends about it like afterwards. I do think that the cinema experience needs, for me personally, I think that in order for it to really survive it's got to be centered around that theatrical experience.
Yeah. So as a last question, what do you think right now would be the first movie you'd like to show LaRue?
Oh, gosh, actually, it depends on what age this happens at too, I think. But like from a full-on like cinema experience, I think The Wizard of Oz could be incredible, just because the range of emotions, the craft of the cinema, the music, the imagination, it's just like, that is a movie. This is a movie, you know? Then later in life, I'd be excited for her to experience The Never-Ending Story, or I think I mentioned earlier An American Tale, which is like rooted in some real history and family storytelling. And then there's films that escape any particular like genre too that I really love, like Baraka, which is just a journey across the world into different cultures and such. You know, if I had the opportunity, if that was playing in a theater and it was being shown in 70 millimeter, like I'd probably take her to that now, 100%. It's like the next evolution from these animal movies.
Yeah.
Now let's go see how people exist in the world and like cultures and different rituals and things. Yeah.
For
You know, I didn't mention my favorite movie of all time, whether it's thinking about a movie I want my daughter to see one day, or when she asks me, like, what are your favorite movies? What's your favorite movie? My absolutely favorite movie of all time, though it may not hold up still now for me if I watch it now, but just in my experience, is Empire of the Sun by Spielberg. With an 11-year-old Christian Bale, I was essentially 11 when I saw it. And I just think like being able to see movies where, as a kid, where a protagonist is your age is clutch. Like that is next level experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Dirty Dancing for me.
Oh, fantastic. Movies play a lot of different roles in our
Yeah.
formative years.
Jeff, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
I love it. You really inspired me when you brought it up. I had some notes here. I was like, oh my God, what if I forget to say something? What was a movie I loved as a kid? Oh my God.
That's the hope. It will inspire movie memories for people when they're listening, and that they'll be inspired to curate a cinema experience for their children. If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.